Welcome, everyone. As you're joining, if you'd like to introduce yourself and where you're from in the chat, we are in webinar mode, so we won't be able to see your faces while we have our event today, but you have access to the chat and you can be introducing yourself and where you're from and what organizations you represent there in the chat. We're going to give it just a few minutes for folks to connect. I see we have lots of attendees here from around the world. I see lots of familiar faces or, well, familiar names, faces when I can see you in the chat. Great to see you all. Tom, I'm putting in the chat just to you my email address if you want to send through the slides. We have folks joining from South Africa, from Germany, from different parts of the United States, from Argentina. Great to see you all. A truly global group. Canada, great to have you all with us. Okay. And Carlos, our interpreter, has joined, so I'm going to pull him into the panelist group, and we'll see if we can't get the Spanish interpretation piece rolling. Hi, Carlos.
Hello.
I'm going to see if I can get the Spanish interpretation working here.
How's everybody doing today?
We are doing great.
Good.
Okay. I have added you as the interpreter, Carlos. So for those of you who need interpretation into Spanish, you should be able to see the interpretation globe at the bottom of your screen and then connect into the Spanish channel. Does that look right from your end, Carlos? Okay, great. And my colleague Tiffany has just joined us as well. Tiffany, I'm getting Carlos connected into the interpretation piece. If you can't hear Carlos, you can toggle through the different, there's an English channel and a Spanish channel. So if you can't hear him, try the other channel, and then you should be able to hear him interpreting into Spanish. Okay? I am going to let Tiffany work on connecting that and making sure that that's working, but we're about 5 after the hour, so I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the United Nations Working Group to End Homelessness panel discussion in honor of World Homelessness Day, which is a day that is recognized every year, not in an official way. You know, it's a grassroots observance day to just recognize and, you know, pay attention in a global sense to the issue of homelessness, which, as we all know, is a rising concern in every corner around the world. Homelessness is, you know, represented in many different aspects and many different manifestations that might look a little bit different globally, but at the end of the day, we know that street homelessness, shelter homelessness, hidden homelessness, people living in doubled up and inadequate and insecure housing conditions are represented in every single country and every single community in the world. And we know that that's not okay. We firmly believe that having access to housing is a human right. And so we also really believe in the power of community and movement building and working together to learn from each other how we can end homelessness, prevent homelessness, sort of better, smarter, and faster, because this is what we need to do for our neighbors. So my name is Lydia Stazen. I'm the executive director of the Institute of Global Homelessness, which is headquartered in Chicago at DePaul University. And I also have the privilege of serving as the co-chair of the United Nations Working Group to End Homelessness. There are many, many, many of our members and colleagues who are on this call today. Colleen van Loon, whom you'll hear from very soon, is also a member of that working group. And this group is an organization of about, or a membership of about 30 different organizations who all have a passion for seeing homelessness addressed at the global level. And so we were founded in 2017 and meet regularly to see how we can partner with people like Francesca, who represents UN Habitat, and connect with different organizations from around the world in order to raise the issue of homelessness within the United Nations agenda as a really important social development problem that needs global attention and action. So that is what kind of the mandate of the working group is. I will put the URL for the working group into the chat. And if you are on this webinar today and you are interested in connecting more with the working group, we are always looking for new members and new folks to join and help out. So we will have that for you to look at and access here shortly. And so today we're going to spend about 40 minutes hearing from our different panelists today. And then we set aside a huge chunk of time for questions and answers, because we find that's really where the rich conversation and learning happens. And so as you're listening along to our incredible panelists today and you have questions, you can be putting those into the chat. You can be putting those into the Q&A function. I'll be keeping track of those as we go, and then we'll have, again, about 40 minutes of presentations and then 30 minutes of questions and answers. We are also recording this event, and so we will be putting it on the working group's website so that people can have access to it in the future as well. So I'm really happy to introduce you to Colleen van Loon, who is a PhD candidate who studies issues around homelessness. She is a member of the Working Group to End Homelessness and has recently done some research into kind of the state of homelessness worldwide. And so she is going to be sharing a little bit with you about some of her findings. So Colleen, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Like Lydia said, my name is Colleen, and I'm a PhD student at Western University in Ontario, Canada. We are here today to discuss and raise awareness to a crisis that affects millions of people worldwide. a crisis that knows no borders and takes many forms. Whether called homelessness, housing deprivation, displacement, housing insecurity, or urban deprivation, the essence is the same. People are living without a secure and safe place to call home. But for today's session, we will use the term homelessness. For the past 3 years, the Working Group to End Homelessness has been analyzing voluntary national reviews, in short referred to as VNRs, which are annual reports submitted by UN member states to provide an overview of their progress on the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. These reviews not only highlight national achievements and challenges, but also offer countries a platform to share insights on addressing key issues related to the SDGs. Our goal as a committee has been to gain a deeper understanding of how member states addressed housing and homelessness within these reports. We found that these topics were frequently discussed in the context of SDG 1, which seeks to end poverty in all its forms everywhere, and SDG 11, which aims to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. We specifically focused on how these goals are represented, as they directly impact on the availability and affordability of housing and responses to homelessness. This review process was essential for pinpointing gaps and identifying areas where urgent action is required. Our analysis of the VNRs in 2022, 2023, and 2024 revealed not only similar trends, but a concerning reality. Nearly half of the world's nations did not report on homelessness at all. Among those that did report often lacked accurate data, with instances of underreporting the full scope of the crisis within their nation. These inaccuracies leaves millions invisible in global strategies, hindering effective solutions and narrow representation of the homelessness issue. We also observe both contrasts and convergences in national approaches. While some member states have established statistical typologies for homelessness, a standardized approach is still missing globally. This lack of consistency prevents us from accurately measuring and addressing the crisis. To make progress, we need improved information sharing and standardized terminology for both the people affected and the services provided worldwide. The VNRs also revealed significant discussion on overcrowding, marginalized areas exposed to hazards, and lack of access to adequate housing and essential services. Refugee camps, for instance, initially intended as temporary solutions, often become permanent informal settlements that fail to meet the basic living standards. These examples highlighted the long-term impact of inadequate responses and the pressing need for sustainable solutions. However, this does not necessarily mean that these issues were discussed in terms of homelessness. Often they were presented as separate challenges, which can obscure the full scope of homelessness within these national contexts. Our review also revealed that among member states, less than half of those who submitted reports in 2023 specifically mentioned having a national homelessness strategy. Perceptions and responses to homelessness also appeared to vary widely. For instance, responses were shaped by climate, cultural norms, urbanization, and social protection systems. These strategies also varied greatly in terms of scope and detail. Some nations in comprehensive plans with clear objectives and measures, while others mentioned homelessness within broader social policy forms without dedicated actions or specific targets. Furthermore, while some member states reported low levels of poverty, they may still face significant housing challenges such as overcrowding. This reveals that a low poverty rate alone does not guarantee adequate living conditions, which was a key point in our analysis. Many nations propose strategies to increase housing stock, repurpose existing structures, and address issues like displacement, income equality, and construction costs, while others highlighted how war, conflict, and climate vulnerabilities impact housing availability. Together, these insights revealed the diverse challenges and approaches that member states face, highlighting the urgent need for coordinated and adaptable solutions that address housing as a fundamental aspect of resilience and social stability. Environmental factors and land use also played significant roles in our analysis, with some nations adopting holistic approaches that address housing within broader social and environmental contexts. However, we found the other nations have taken a more segmented approach, addressing environmental and social factors separately. This can limit a full understanding of the interconnectedness of these issues. These observations highlighted the disparities among member states and how housing is both discussed and represented. The VNRs reflected significant discussions on overcrowding, marginalized areas to hazards, and lack of access to adequate housing and essential services. Refugee camps initially intended as temporary solutions often become permanent informal settlements that fail to meet basic living standards. These examples highlighted the long-term impact of inadequate responses and the pressing need to bring conversations around homelessness to a global and more focused level. Reflecting on the 2022, 2023, and 2024 VNRs, while some progress has been made in recognizing the importance of adequate housing and homelessness, our analysis revealed that significant gaps and inconsistencies persist globally. Many member states mentioned housing within the broader context of poverty reduction and social protection, but explicit acknowledgement of homelessness as a critical issue remains limited. Homelessness manifests in many ways, such as life on the streets, overcrowded shelters, informal settlements, or temporary accommodations. In every form, it is a lack of stability, safety, and more importantly, dignity. By focusing on a unified global approach, we can foster opportunities for accurate data collection and the transference of meaningful solutions globally. We hope our current actions today and future actions encourage member states and societies to advocate with us for homelessness to be recognized in our VNRs as a standalone sustainable development goal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colleen. And I was really struck by your really excellent kind of explanation of how the language around homelessness can be different in different contexts, and that for the working group, we have found that homelessness is the word that resonates most strongly in terms of a global context. But thank you for recognizing those nuances, and your reflections on also how member states at the UN have a really kind of scattered approach to reporting on homelessness in their reviews has to do with the fact that there is no SDG indicator on homelessness. There is no instruction, there is no guidance, there is no framework for them. And that is one of our huge aims as a working group, is to get homelessness more incorporated into the official framework so that it brings more standardization and more structure to how countries do collect and report on information. And, you know, for us, it's not just data collection and reporting for the sake of, you know, interest. It's an accountability measure. If we can't answer the question, how many people are homeless globally, we can't hold countries and communities responsible for taking concrete action towards the issue. So it's a really important building block that's missing right now. So thank you for your work and for your report on that. If folks have questions for Colleen or about the content she presented, you can go ahead and put those into the chat. Again, we'll be doing questions and answers towards the end, but as it's fresh in your mind, go ahead and be putting those questions in. And so now we will go to Francesca Lionetti. Francesca is a dear colleague both of IGH and of the working group. She works in the housing rights division of the United Nations Human Settlements Program, which is also called UN Habitat. And UN Habitat is really responsible for Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is around making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And obviously issues around housing and security and homelessness fit well within that mandate. So Francesca, over to you.
Thank you, Lydia, and thank you, everybody. So, as mentioned, my name is Francesca Lionetti, and I do work at UN Habitat. As some of you might already know or have just discovered, UN Habitat is the agency within the UN system that is charged with promoting socially and environmentally sustainable cities, and with ensuring that everybody has access to affordable, safe, and adequate housing as a universal right. In this, we really see homelessness as the most extreme form and indicators of social exclusion and poverty. And
Francesca, sorry to interrupt. Your sound is a little bit low. Could you turn it up, possibly?
Let me see. settings. Is it better?
Yes, much better. Thank you. Okay, go
Great.
ahead.
Okay, sorry. Now I have to close everything again. Okay, here we are. So I was saying, like, UN Habitat really sees homelessness as an extreme form and indicator of social exclusion and poverty, and the most evident manifestation of the lack to adequate housing. We know that is often associated with social stigma, which leads to discrimination and limited access to essential services. So homelessness is a pressing issue that affects millions and requires urgent attention, as all of us are well aware of. And it also exists on every continent, as we just heard, even if in different forms. And in all these settings, it's interconnected with issues related to poverty, to inequality, to inadequate housing, to displacement, gender-based violence, discrimination, lack of decent employment, speculation, privatization of social and public services, and gaps in social protection systems. So we really think and believe that ending homelessness and housing exclusion must go beyond emergency responses. We need holistic strategies that encompass housing, healthcare, social protection, education, and many more sectors. Since 2019, UN Habitat has been working in partnership with organizations such as the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UNDESA, as well as the NGO Working Group to End Homelessness, IGH, Unanima, and many more, with the goal to establish a clear, universal, and inclusive definition of homelessness that recognizes its complexity and its context specificity as well, to develop a comprehensive global measurement and to support the formulation of policies that are centered on people, based in evidence, focus on prevention, and with a very central housing-led, wrapped with services component, and are cross-sectoral. An important achievement of this collaborative effort has been the General Assembly resolution on inclusive policies and programs to address homelessness, which was tabled in 2021 by the African group and was adopted by consensus by all the other member states. So it represented a real global commitment, let's say, to have homelessness central in the discussion on social development, and a commitment to focus more attention and resources to addressing the topic. The resolution also requested UN Habitat and UNDESA to support the Secretary General in preparing a global report that provided a comprehensive overview of existing interventions and also critical areas for improvement when addressing homelessness. And during the preparation of this report, it became very clear the limitation in the current methods for research and measurement of homelessness, because particularly when it comes to overlooking the impact of homelessness on historically marginalized groups. So for instances, we know that narrow definition of homelessness tend to exclude the experiences of women and children, and to make them less visible, let's say, because they are less likely to be living on the street. When they do, they conceal themselves and their gender, and also for safety reasons, they are often less likely, for safety reasons, and often they're also less likely to approach emergency shelters before all the other options are exhausted. So this is one of the reasons why it is important that we really use a definition and a statistical framework that is really capturing the totality of housing exclusion and of homelessness, and doesn't focus too narrowly on specific groups. And we know that investment in tools and surveys have played a crucial role in advancing this understanding of homelessness, and they have contributed to an emerging consensus that homelessness encompasses a wide range of diverse circumstances. which can be experienced, as Colleen was mentioning, by long-term street dwellers, but also by recently displaced families, by people fleeing domestic violence and exploitation, but also conflicts and natural disasters, as well as newcomers to urban settings living in informal settlements, for example. So, for instance, examples of how investment in tools and surveys have changed things. One example could be the census carried out by Paris, by Mayor Hidalgo's office, that in 2018 brought really new perspective, especially in the gender dimension of homelessness, to the policymaking in the city. So the first Nuit Solidaire, this census in 2018, revealed that even among people sleeping rough, 12% were women, which is very different from the estimate of 2% that the city was working with before. Similarly, the first national survey carried out in Brazil in 2008 showed that 71% of the people experiencing homelessness were employed, but they were employed in the informal sector. And therefore, 89% were lacking social benefits, and on top, 25% were lacking identification documents. It also showed, this 2018 survey, that 80% of the people experiencing homelessness were living in the city where they always lived, or in a nearby municipality. So these kind of findings really helped, on one hand, to shift public opinions and to make it like really rooted in evidence, but also prompts the development of context-specific interventions, including specific support in the case of Paris for women, and in the case of Brazil for informal workers employed in the informal sector. And to build on this kind of progress, we know that we need a comprehensive and methodical approach to global data collection. As Lydia was saying, we don't want data for the sake of data, but we want data that would allow us to develop the correct strategies and the correct policies, and also to make sure that these policies and these strategies are actually working and they're having the impact that we hope for them to have. So this data would not only this approach should not only involve regular point-in-time counts or real-time to measure street homelessness, which of course is extremely important, but we also would need collecting more disaggregated data that really capture the specific needs, drivers, and extent of homelessness as experienced by different groups. We are also very much aware that we need to engage much more with people with lived experiences of homelessness in developing these methodologies, so that we are sure that the data reflects the reality that they live, and also that we produce knowledge and understanding, also tracking, monitor public attitudes towards homelessness. We measure the exposure of people experiencing homelessness to risk like hate crimes, assault, and exploitation, and that we monitor and assess the extent of exclusion and discrimination in access to services such as housing, healthcare, social security, education, and employment. And I'm very happy to report that thanks to the support of YGEH and the working group, and actually their work, the addition of an indicator on homelessness is currently being discussed in the Sustainable Development Goal review of 2025. So this attention to homelessness within the SDGs is surfacing. Unfortunately, the SDGs did not mention homelessness, neither under SDG 1 nor under SDG 11. And as Lydia was mentioning, this is a real challenge and barrier for member states to ensure, to have the issue on their in their list of priority when reporting to SDGs, and this is one of the barriers that prevent us from having a global, not simplistic picture of how things are going. Still, collecting data is certainly not enough, and bridging gaps between policies and realities would require much more coordination between governments at different levels, but also with civil society, academia, and people with lived experiences of homelessness. We know that there is no single path into and out of homelessness, and addressing people's needs requires tailored and personalized response. That starts from a place of agency and involvement of people with lived experiences. We also know that prevention is a key focus, and that while housing alone cannot end homelessness, we do think that addressing housing exclusion, especially for marginalized groups, is critical to break the cycle of poverty and exclusion. So involving both tailored and cross-sectoral strategies addressing both the structural factors and the risks, the individual risks associated with homelessness, require strong legislation that recognize and prioritize housing as a common good and as a basic human right. So I will just conclude with a short message from our new executive director, Madam Anna Claudia Rosbach, who some of you might see in a video that has been produced with IGH and some of the cities that are part of the International Mayors Council on Homelessness. While homelessness is complex, it can be solved. And this is a collective responsibility requiring coordinated action from local, national, and global effort. We do need urgent action to make ending homelessness a priority and to ensure that everyone has a safe and dignified place to call home. But I think with the right partners and the right solutions, we are on a good path to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. I really appreciated your framing of homelessness as an intersectional issue. It touches all these other forms of social exclusion and makes it a very challenging issue then to resolve. And so part of the way we can help to resolve it is to have that disaggregated data, which brings the understanding into those different intersections and then can be used to create those tailored and specialized responses. Because every person experiencing homelessness is unique. They're going to need a different, a tailored set of housing and services in order to become stably housed again. And data is one huge component of how we do that. I was also really encouraged by the progress you've shared in terms of the UN ecosystem and how this is an issue that's now very much part of UN Habitat's platform. And, that the new executive director of UN Habitat really understands this issue deeply based on her background in land rights. And also that it's on the radar of the Secretary General and that he, presented his first report on homelessness at last year's, was it just last year? Last year's General Assembly, 2023, yes. And so, we are making progress in bringing this issue deeper and deeper into the UN agendas. And, we want to make sure that as we do it, we are looking at the evidence base on prevention and outreach and housing and services so that the solutions that come out of all of this advocacy and awareness raising that we're doing are ones that really do bring concrete impact to the issue of homelessness globally. So like I said, for Colleen, if you have questions for Francesca or questions about the content that she presented, please do be adding those into either the chat or the Q&A function. Again, we're keeping an eye on those and we'll be bringing those forward into the Q&A. So now we are going to move from the global frame to more of a regional frame, because the number one question I get asked in this work is who's doing this the best? And honestly, the answer is our friends in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland. Those are the countries that are really doing the best in terms of addressing homelessness. So I'm really happy to have Tom from Denmark Denmark, calling in this morning from his car in Copenhagen. Tom is a strategic consultant with the social housing department in Odense, Denmark. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Tom?
That's okay.
Okay.
That's okay.
And he also serves on the steering committee for Habitat, which is a fianza network that focuses on the role of municipalities in tackling homelessness. So, Tom, I've got some slides that I'll be sharing for you. And then as you want me to go to the next slide, just give me a heads up and let me know.
That's okay. Okay, I'm from Odense. That's a city in Denmark with. I can't see the slides, but
I'm
okay.
just pulling them up now. Can you see them?
Okay. Yes, I'm from a city called Odense in Denmark. It's the third biggest city. We have around 210,000 inhabitants. Let me start talking. Change to the next one. We just made a new social policy in our city. It tells a little bit the scene for where we are working with social excluded, also homelessness. We want to be a spacious big city, we want to have a spacious labor market. We want to have a good youth life for everyone, equality in health, meaningful communities, and digital accessibility for all. This is today in a lot of our countries, a lot of things goes on in the digital scene, and if somebody's closed out from that, then they're really closed out from the city. If we're talking about Odense as an inclusive city, it started up around 2010. You can go to the next slide. At that time, we had, like many other cities have, we had problems with addicts, drug addicts, who were filling a lot in the street. And it went on having a lot of newspapers, articles, and a lot of people felt that it was very unpleasant with things going on. Then there was called into a meeting where some of our politicals, also our mayor, and the police, and some of the NGOs, the director of the shop association in the city, the guards who walks in the streets, and several other people attended. And it started up to the statement that when we are a city in that size we have, there shall be space for everyone, also for the people who live in another way. Therefore, we talked with the police, how can we do that? And the police told that there was a major problem because, of course, other people shouldn't feel threatened by a group of socially excluded. But at the same time, if they had to say you shouldn't be here, where should they be? Therefore, we had to create some kind of space in the city, at our city places. So in the open areas. So therefore, we created what we call sanctuaries, which is meant as a place where you can hang out and drink your beers together with your friends, even smoke your hashes and do other things. You're, of course, like all the other citizens in our city, you are allowed to have your life. But if there is too much party going on, then you should go down to these places, and if the police are getting involved or the guards, they tell them, hey, go down there and have your party. What went on after this was that we have a network going on today where we are the cultural department, the green department, police, railroad station, parking sellers, all that kind of actors who have a role in the city life, where we talk about how are things going. Is somebody feeling insecure, something problem, something else? And we're talking a lot about how can we have a bigger security in the city. What we're talking about here is that we're moving dare to take the talk about the many different kind of lives we have in Odense, from only being a social and a police matter to be a matter for the city. So the city has to take this responsibility and, for example, create the sanctuaries. It's also a way where we try to tackle not in my backyard. As we all know, we have to work together and find some solutions together. at the bottom line, this is instead of talking about exclusion and trying to get people away, then we're talking about making inclusion. So we try to live together, all the different kind of ways we have, even if you're a child or you're an older person or you have a kind of misuse. We can go to the next one. We had some certain values going on here. We wanted to make room for social and marginalized people. We're talking about equality. We're talking about dialogue. We're talking about involvement, cooperation. Everyone has a responsibility. The homeless, the social excluded, the police, the shops, everybody has a responsibility. One entry point, you shouldn't phone 100 different places if you feel worried or think somebody needs some help. It should be one way. Coordination and making tangible solutions. A lot of pragmatism in this one. Today, we think we have a city with room for everyone and where everyone is heard. We have an agreement and cooperation models with a very fast response. So we talk with people if they have some kind of feeling about this. And we now have today in Odense 7 sanctuaries. We just made it completely new last month. So that's something we keep on having, going to do. Next one, please. Other examples of the way we work in this inclusive city, we made a GPS tracking of the users of a night hostel. When they woke up in the morning, they got a GPS tracker, each of them, and then the battery lasted until the evening. And of course, they agreed, it was voluntary that agreed in this. And we did that 2 weeks, a year, in 4 years, also 8 weeks. And we made a report of this together with the University of Copenhagen, where we tried to find some kind of knowledge about how do the social excluded use the city, which ways do they go, where do they hang out. And one of the reasons why we did it was so we could make sure that we as municipality had our offers the right services, the right places, and also where the NGOs should make their services the right way and right places. We also realized that, for example, all the social excluded, or the most of the group of social excluded in Odense, they are using the big ways, big roads. They're not going on the small roads as we thought. They want to have some secureness. They want to be a part of the city. And this is one of the really interesting things. How can all be a part of the city and at the same time have the respect that we are all legal to be here? We made a new newsletter every time we have a meeting in this inclusive city, so shop owners and others who are interested can get information. We put up postcard at our libraries. So if you feel that somebody needs some help, or you think somebody has to look at something, there is one telephone number, and that's my telephone number, and you can phone to this, and then we contact the people and try to listen. Why do I think this old guy needs some help, or what is the problem by where the children are playing in the park? All that kind of stuff. Next, please. But this is only one leg in our work with the social excluded. When we're talking about this, we in Odense have been working with Housing First for homelessness, working with reduce homelessness since 2009 as well. And to be honest, if we want to give a person your own home, then it's also very important that the neighbor doesn't read about in your newspaper you should be afraid for him. So therefore, we think the work with inclusive city and the dareness to say that we're all equal also make the possibility that people have a bigger possibility to be included in the local society and to keep their apartment, because our apartments are spread all over the city among all the rest of the citizens in Odense. This is just a lot of statements I put here, but I think it's important to say that in Odense, when we're talking about Housing First, we have the the thought and we work from that everybody should have the possibility to have their own apartment. We can't predict who can't stay in this apartment. So therefore, we give everybody, also the people who have the most problems, we give them the possibility to have their own apartment with support. Yes, please, next. And this shows that it seems like we're doing something right. In Denmark, we have national counts every second year. We are counting a week in week 6. And we're using the methodology from ETAS, which is the European way of defining homelessness. And what we can see, this is index counts. We can see in Denmark the national count. We have about 6,000 homeless in Denmark today. It's been going up and falling, and in this year it's going a little bit up. But in Odense, we managed to reduce our homelessness with 56%. Today we have 95 people, and this is 7 rough sleepers and other things in according ETAS. We think we have a political wish that we should abolish homelessness, and we really think that this should be possible. We don't think abolishing homelessness is 0. We think it's something like 50 persons, because there will always be some people who's in this transfer and having some problems and don't have a home. But we have to, fast as possible, help them to get further on, so they're not going to live in homelessness in a longer period. Please, next. There's made a lot of reports and studies about Odense, and this is, I'm sorry to say now we're in this group, it's most of this is in Danish, but one of them is very important. We have our national count, which of course is important, but we also made together with Vive, which is the states where they're making all the studies and reports. We made a report especially about housing first in Odense. Please, next. This is, we have a personal number in Denmark, so therefore we can see what kind of services and also expenses that the state delivers to the citizens in Denmark. And we can see in Odense, we from the period 2010 to 2018, we gave 523 citizens an apartment according to Housing First. Today it's over 700. 80% of them kept their apartment. We also can see in this report that if you take all the costs for jail, hospital, institutions, all that kind of stuff, medicine, things like that, then 5 years after a person not is homeless anymore, but have their own apartment and living their own apartment, it makes less expenses for the society for around 75,000 Danish kroner. That's something like 10,000 euros. Please, next. And the institute makes some recommendation behalf of on grounds of the study in Odense for the rest of Denmark, and it's nearly the same as they say everywhere. We have to have a good cooperation with other people who work with this area. We have to have a good cooperation with the housing market, and then they also mentioned, which I mentioned early on, what might be very special in Odense is that we gave everybody this this possibility to have a house. We didn't say on forehand that you're too bad, you can't manage and things like that. We gave people the possibility. Please, next. And this is the small funny part about this. Normally, when we are working in a political organization like the municipality, then we would say that the politicians gives us a strategy, and then afterwards we try to work from this. But we started, as I mentioned early on, in 2009, working with both the Inclusive City and Housing First. And in 2017, suddenly the politicians realized something good was going on. So then they made a strategy for this area called Strategy for Inclusive City and Housing First. So today it's also something that's projected by the political in our municipality. Please, next. Yeah, and this is the story from Odense. I can say we made a new national law concerning homelessness work. In this, it was started last year, and this one also states that all the municipality in Denmark has to work according to principles in housing first. This was the short presentation. Normally this take over half an hour.
Thank you, Tom. It's difficult to recap your comments because everything you said was gold. I loved even how you began it with the value of a spacious city. I think that word spacious is one that really resonates because I think in this work around housing insecurity and homelessness, it feels like we have to scrabble for every resource that we get when we need to be framing it as how do we approach this with an expansive and spacious frame of mind. So much of what you said shows that the work in Odense is really following the evidence base around what works to end homelessness, having multi-sectoral collaboration, having city government take leadership, the narrative and framing that needs to come from a value of inclusivity. And you just shared such solid examples that I think our audience will find really, really interesting. So thank you. I would make the same call to our audience. If you have questions for Tom about what he presented, please be putting those into the chat. We've had several questions come in so far, so continue to put those in as we are gonna have just, a pretty good chunk of time to have a discussion. And so now we will move to a dear colleague of IGH's in the working group, Juha Kahila. Juha, it's great to have you with us today. I don't have your bio pulled up because I only have Tom's slides pulled up. So I will let you introduce yourself and then share with the group what you have prepared today.
Great to be here, and it's always so lovely to hear Tom's presentation. I think it's pure gold, as you, Lydia, said, and I've been lucky enough that I have visited the city of Odense, and I recommend it to everyone. The inspiration you can find from the city and the work Tom and the people are doing there. It's just amazing. So my name is Juha Kahila, and I'm the head of international affairs at the Y-Foundation Helsinki, Finland. And I'm gonna talk to you about the ending homelessness the Finnish way, how we have been able to decrease the number of homeless people for the last 12 years in a row. And then I will try to pull my slides. Let's see if I'm able to do it. It's always so exciting to do it, even though we have been doing it for many years. Let me know if you can see the slides. Great. So just a couple of words about the Y-Foundation. So the main thing we are doing is we are a landlord. So we are building affordable housing for low-income people, for homeless people, for those who are on the edge of becoming homeless, and so on. And at the moment, we have a housing stock around 19,000 apartments across Finland, which makes us the fourth largest landlord and the biggest non-profit landlord nationwide in Finland. And then we have no political attachments whatsoever. We have been founded by the 5 biggest cities in Finland, and then some associations and foundations, Red Cross, for example. So we build affordable housing, but what makes Y-Foundation really unique is that we have this development unit where I work, for example, and we have our own research team, 4 full-time researchers doing all kind of research around homelessness, housing, affordable housing, housing first, and so on. But then again, also things like carbon neutrality and green transitioning and these kind of things. And not only here in Finland, but also globally together with our networks. So that's one thing we are doing. Then we also coordinate the National Housing First Development Network, which brings together all the key stakeholders around homelessness. So the state organizations, service providers, people with lived experience, landlords, housing providers, health sector, justice department, and so on. So it's a really important part of the work. And they offer different kind of training and develop the work together, which creates this kind of co-ownership for all the different actors in the field of homelessness and beyond. And then we do a lot of advocacy work. So our CEO Teija is meeting a lot of politicians, and then again we also try to affect affect things internationally. So in our strategy, there is a part where it says that our goal is to end homelessness here in Finland, but also reduce it internationally. And then in that sense, we get many hundreds of visitors a year to see the work we are doing in Finland, not just the work at the Y-Foundation, but overall in the field of homelessness. And we try to organize their schedules and everything between. And of course, taking part of different working groups internationally, like the UN Homeless Working Group, and then many others, which I will talk a little bit later. So homelessness in Europe, this is the harsh reality. So in my dream, the whole map would be full of green spots and maybe 1 year. But at the moment, it looks like this. So Finland is the only EU country with a long-term reduction in homelessness. There are some good things happening elsewhere. I think Denmark is on the forefront at the moment. In Norway, they are doing some good things. In Sweden as well, the numbers are going down a little bit, and so on. So there is good developments happening, especially in the Nordic countries, but then again, also in Austria, which has finally have the Housing First as a government program there as well. So good things are happening around Europe as well, and that's a great thing. So this is how the things have been looking in Finland. So I think here the cornerstones have been that in many countries, let's say Canada and UK, they stopped building affordable housing in the beginning of the 90s because they thought that the market would take care of the affordable housing as well. Well, prove me wrong, but I haven't seen any evidence anytime that it has happened. But the Finnish politicians, they were quite clever enough that they kept building affordable housing because they knew that the need is there and will be there. And then the second turning point is 2008 when we started the National Housing First program. So we did a full systematic change from the staircase model into Housing First and never looked back in that sense. And I will explain what the Finnish Housing First means a little bit later. And then in Finland, it was a political decision to change the system and start doing Housing First. So it's a little bit different compared to many other countries where the NGOs and service providers and so on tries to lobby the government to start doing Housing First. But in Finland, it was actually another way around. So the government had to lobby the service providers and the landlords that, hey, this is something that we want to do in the future. Get away from the shelters and temporary accommodation and start building more affordable homes. So 2008 was the starting point. The Housing First principle was introduced in Finland, and then back then we started to renovate the shelters and temporary accommodation into permanent homes. And that means that in Finland, in the Housing First, we actually have different kind of housing options for people, because we strongly believe that in Housing First, the support always has to be tailor-made. But when it comes to housing, we also think that one size does not fit for all, that people need to have options when it comes to housing as well. So the first two programs were all about this kind of systemic change, renovating the shelters, training the employees, recruiting more employees, and so on. And I think we made some great results. And for example, if you ever visit the city of Helsinki, you won't see any tents or encampments or those kind of things, because the city of Helsinki, for example, has more or less been able to end the street homelessness. And I think that's something that we are really, really proud. Then the third program was all about prevention. Fourth program was all about cooperation. And now we have the latest one, which is ending long-term homelessness by 2027. And we'll see if that works out or not. And this is what we did in Finland. So before the Housing First, we put a lot of money into emergency response. We built new shelters, new temporary accommodation, all these kind of things, which only manage homelessness and will not end it for anyone. And then when we started the Housing First, we started to put more resources into prevention side of the work. So we have this housing advice services, which means that if you are struggling with the rent or have any kind of problems regarding your housing, you have to have access to housing advisors who will then help you any way they can. And that has been a really game changer regarding that they have been able to prevent evictions quite a bit. And of course, building more and more affordable housing, then again, also building different housing options for people. So these Housing First units, which are like community-based living, more or less. And then people sometimes ask that cost a lot of money, and that is true. And we started 2008 when it was a global banking crisis, and we found the money. So in my experience, it's always a little bit of excuse when we're talking about we don't have the money to do it, because we find money to do all other things in the field. And then the other thing is that, you know, you don't always have to find new money. You just need to think how you can use the existing money you are already putting into the system. Because, for example, in the UK, I've read the news stories that many of the local authorities are putting 40-50% of their annual budget into temporary accommodation. So how about putting some of that money into prevention and so on? So there are many possibilities to do this work differently. And this is the Finnish Housing First. So I think the main difference compared to many other countries is that it's not designed for one certain group of people. So for example, chronic homeless people or young homeless people or something like that, but for everyone. And the support need can be anything between 1 month to rest of people's lives. And I think that has made a big difference. So there is not a competition in that sense that who deserves the housing, because we feel that everyone deserves a home of their own. And then, yeah, the number one is the permanent housing. So regarding if which housing you are living, if it's scattered housing or housing first unit, it's always permanent. So you have your own rental agreement, which you signed, and you can live there as long as you wish. And then the tailored support services, which means that the support is tailor-made for you. And in Finland, we mainly use ICM. So that's a bit of a difference compared to some countries which are heavily using ACT, for example. And then the number 3 is affordable housing. So of course, in Finland, we are in a lucky situation that we have a quite sizable affordable housing stock, which is targeted to those people who actually need it. So at the moment, we have around 400,000 affordable state subsidized homes, which equals around 13% of all the housing. So of course, that makes a difference for us. But then again, from our experience and what we heard from Tom and the others is that, you know, it's quite hard to end homelessness if you don't have the housing. So that's why we are always encouraging organizations and countries that, you know, housing is the first thing you actually need. And then the number 4 is the prevention, which I talk about a little bit regarding the housing advisors. And then again, combine that together with the affordable housing stock. It makes a big part of the work we are doing. And then especially in the housing first units, we find out that when people get the home and the support, at some point they might need some meaningful things to do as well. And then many of the people, they haven't worked, you know, many years. Some have been dropping out of high school already. So many of the housing first units, they have dedicated work coaches and they do different kind of work in the unit. So for example, they can clean the community spaces and they do different kind of neighborhood work. They clean the trashes outside the unit. And but then again, also they do t-shirts. There is heavy metal shops, wood shops. They fix bikes and computers and these kind of things. But it's not only inside the unit, but they have also deep connection to outside private companies, for example, the National Post Office, IKEA, and so on. So there is this kind of clear pathway for people if they wish to work forward in their lives. And number 6 is my favorite, normality. So we try to put all these things under the one word, which is normality. So people sign normal rental agreement as anyone else. Scattered housing and the housing first units, they are in a good locations. So near the city centers, for example, so the services are there. That makes a big difference how people actually access the services. People use the same health and social services as anyone else. They can claim the same benefits as anyone else. They are the citizens of the cities and municipalities, just like anyone else. They just might need some kind of support, but then again, who doesn't need some kind of support every now and then? And then we collaborate European and international level, so we do a lot of development, research, and training together with our partners, Housing First Europe Hub, which we founded together in France back in 2016. Then a little bit over a year ago, we founded this Nordic Homelessness Alliance, which we are really happy that Tom is also part of that alliance. And of course, there is the European Platform on Combating Homelessness, EPOC and EPOC Practice, which we are taking part because we feel like that one organization, one country cannot end homelessness. We need everyone on board to make it reality that someday there would be home for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juha. I always think about your example of wanting to turn all of Europe into green. And I think for the working group to end homelessness, we want to see the whole world turn green with steady progress towards ending homelessness. And your reflection on, the lack of investment in affordable housing from the European perspective is one that we see globally as well. There has not been steady and consistent investment into housing at all different price points. And that really is one huge reason that we're seeing homelessness increase on the global level, is that kind of financialization and commoditization of housing, rather than delivering it as a right. So okay, before we move into questions and answers, I just want to pick up on a couple of comments in the chat, that this is a very regional approach and perspective on homelessness. And we do recognize that. I know that the committee that was working on putting this event together was working to have someone from the Latin American context present, but it didn't come through. And so we are regionally skewed. So that is a very valid criticism of today's content. And at the same time, IGH, we were able to take our learning cohort to Finland earlier this year. And our cohort comes from all different kinds of backgrounds and contexts. And so we had conversations there to say, what is one thing you could take from these contexts that you could apply back in your own country or community? And every single one of our participants there in Finland, and these are folks from Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, South Africa, all of them were able to find at least one thing that they could take back and start to incorporate into their own community. So yes, the contexts are different. Yes, some of the challenges are different, and there is still a lot that we can learn from each other that can be applied across all of these contexts. Okay, so we have about 25 minutes to go through the questions and answers, and we have so many good ones coming in. I think we could take probably days of discussion on certain ones of these questions. So I'm going to take them a little bit out of order. So the first one that I want to raise for the panel, and I'm going to send this first to Francesca. The question from Anna Maria is, why is it important to have a strong definition of homelessness?
Thank you. It is important to have a strong definition of homelessness and one that is inclusive, because at the moment we are having, well, what has been a bit discussed, like situations on the ground are often different, but we see some root causes being similar. And it's important to have a way to compare some of the data, but also ensure that what gets measured, that what matters gets measured. So the reason why we would like for a set definition is to ensure data standard and the fact that there is some comparability between the data, but also to ensure that what matters gets measured and that we are not only surfacing part of the challenges, but that we are representing the experiences of everybody who is facing housing exclusion, being that living in extremely overcrowded environment, being in precarious living conditions, having to remain in an abusive domestic situations because of a lack of alternative, living without access to basic services, etc. So that is my answer in short, but happy to engage more on the long term as well.
Thank you, Francesca. Any other panelists want to come in on that?
Yeah. I would say from Denmark that we can see that we made this national count each second year in now 15 years. It suddenly made that things were much more factual instead of all this kind of feeling things going on in each city, and we had to focus on the same thing, both locally but also nationally, and it has an enormous impact, and that's the reason why we could make this national legislation last year that force the local municipality to do something about it, and we even have some kind of tool to follow up on how it's going. I think that's very important if you want to make politicals and other people to take a responsibility.
Great. Colleen, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add also here in Canada, there's been a lot of debate in our literature globally around definitions on homelessness, ongoing debates about literal definitions to more, expanded and inclusive definitions. I think what I've noticed in some of the literature is, this perception of home in a house really came through a lot of definitions globally. And while the meaning of home means different for different cultures, I think that's really important to be aware of when we are constructing our definitions. For instance, our Indigenous populations here, they may consider home to include land, spirit, animals, and nature. And so for different populations, we really have to be inclusive, because when we are providing services and we are collecting data, we have to ensure that our data that is collected, which is generally based on our definitions, is inclusive and does speak to the magnitude and the diversity within what we call homelessness here.
Great, thank you. And I'll just add to one of the ways we work with communities and countries at IGH in terms of defining homelessness is starting with a broad category. So people living literally without homes. But then across all our communities, they can define that more specifically in ways that are appropriate to their context. So, here in the United States, living literally without a home looks like living on the street, living under a bridge overpass, things like that. Whereas, our colleagues who are working in India have people who are living sort of in a grassy median between a street, so you have to create a flexible framework for defining homelessness that maybe starts with a broad category, but then allows for more specificity in different contexts. Okay, so we're going to move into a couple of other questions that come from a colleague in Argentina. And this one, again, I'll start with you, Francesca. So Argentina shares some similarities with Brazil regarding informal job conditions, and there are going to be more informal and insecure job conditions. Like, we're not going back. This is going to continue to get more and more insecure. And so any thoughts or observations on how other countries are dealing with this informal and kind of inadequate job situation?
Thanks. Easy one.
These are all easy questions.
Yes. Well, I think some of the presentations we heard today kind of address it. I think, from my background, of course, from UN Habitat perspective, it all starts with a home. So ensuring that people have access to adequate housing, no matter their job or employment condition, it's one of the responses that we would like to see more. So expand the type of tenures and opportunities that people have to access housing, and ensuring that they have support in doing that, notwithstanding their job condition, is one of the answers. And then I think, but this is more my ILO and UNDESA area of work, expanding social security and floors, and ensure universal coverage of these tools. And then I would say prevention also on when it comes to employment strategies and policies. I think it's important that we address these things in a systemic way, and that we ensure that people are not left to face the consequences of an increasingly informalized and falling apart job market. This would be my answer.
Great, thank you, Francesca. One really specific example from Chicago, where IGH is headquartered, is right now we have a significant number of economic migrants coming into the city, and they're working largely in the informal economy because our national policies mean that they cannot have work permits, which is incredibly challenging. But sort of in the meantime, we have NGOs that are signing a master lease for multiple units with a landlord, and then kind of taking that financial risk on as an NGO, and then working to place the migrant families and individuals into those housing units while they wait for their paperwork to be processed and while they wait for those work permits to come through. So there are some creative ways to sort of get around that, but it does require an NGO that has a certain financial base to be able to take on that risk. And so yes, I think the connection between employment and housing security is a really obvious one that needs to be paid attention to at multiple different levels. Any other panelists want to come in on that one? The connection between informal and kind of inadequate work situations and housing. Okay, we will charge right on. A question from our colleague John Hopkins from South Africa. So in South Africa, there are over 2 million households waiting for a home. Most of these folks are living in informal settlements and unsuitable conditions. On top of that, there are people experiencing street homelessness. There's a concern there in South Africa, which is one I think we've experienced in our own communities as well, which if you start implementing housing first, this creates an incentive to move onto the street in order to get a house. And so I'm really curious from sort of Tom and Juha's perspectives first, how, if you were working in that South African context, how would you begin to effectively address those kinds of homelessness and that concept around?
It's a very difficult question, but I would say that very often the situation with homelessness, a part of the work with homelessness is there is a housing problem, and it's a major problem very often. Even in Denmark, if we talk about homelessness, then a big part of this is housing policy and lack of affordable housing. But still, I think what I learned through 25 years working with this, it's also a matter about starting up and dare to say this is a special program. Because if you have that amount you're talking about in South Africa, it's not realistic that all people could be in a housing first program. I think it's a matter about starting, getting shown that things can be done, and some of the people who you think can't live in their own apartment can. And then I think the other part is to do something about the housing market.
Yeah,
So
I echo with Tom, and it's all about starting. And then it's easy for me to say that in Finland the housing first it's housing for all and then for everyone, because we are a quite small country. We are in the Nordics and we have been building the affordable housing for 70 years. So I think that's important to remember that 70 years ago we started this process of building affordable housing. So like Tom said, it's good to have a starting point, and then if you have shelters and if you have temporary accommodation, and I feel that of course those are better solutions for people than being on the streets, but you can work with many of the housing first principles in the shelters and temporary accommodation as well when it comes to support element of the work. So I think with those elements you can start up the work and then it's just up keeping up the building, because that's eventually what will end the homelessness.
Yeah, I love that. Start somewhere. I love your insight, Juha, about, how can you incorporate principles of housing first into your approach, even if you cannot do a housing first model. And then I think, there's in terms of like the concept that there's an incentive then for people to move on the street, that's a concern that we hear a lot, whether it's housing first or other types of services and interventions. I've yet to see the data bear that out. And so I think this also kind of connects into the stigma and the misunderstanding of how people who are experiencing homelessness are living their lives and are accessing services. And I think it kind of fits in well, Tom, with you know, how Odense is framing the issue around inclusivity and trying to move from the not in my backyard perspectives into more of communities working together. And so we have one other question around that from Jordan in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And he is asking, what were the most important components of the move from NIMBY to inclusion in Odense?
I think, to be honest, it was that some political persons took the responsibility and they dared stand up. The mayor dared stand up and say, we have to be a city where there should be room for everybody. If he hadn't been doing that, nothing had been happening. So it's a matter about some important and influencing people take the responsibility. And we're so lucky that it succeeded to. So today, all political parties is back this, and they're really proud about it because they can see that we don't have all that kind of conflict. Another part which I didn't mention is, for example, if we avoid to have all this negative stories in the newspaper, then the shop owners have a better business, because if we have all this kind of nasty stories going on, that there's this big insecureness, then people are not from the countryside are not going to shop in our shops in the center city, as Odense is. So therefore, there's even an economic issue in it for shop owners, which is really strange. But and they recognize that today because we've been working with it in such a long period. But political responsibility, that's the major thing. And dareness to talk about it.
Great. Juha?
Yeah, once again, it's just so easy to echo what Tom already said, but in Finland, it happened a similar way. So there was this really influential housing minister who had this kind of vision that we don't have anyone on the streets, and he could see the benefits as well. So it's a safer city and better city for everyone when we actually take care of the most vulnerable people in our society. And when everyone has home of their own, they don't need to be on the streets. There is less crimes, less all these kind of things. And as Tom mentioned, it's also good for business owners, restaurants, local cafeterias, and so on. And I think what we have been able to do in the city of Helsinki, for example, is that many of the grocery stores, for example, and the coffee shops, they have this kind of connection with the homelessness sector as well. So we have been able to connect the grocery stores and coffee shop to this work program that I mentioned about, that the Housing First units are doing. So it's a win-win-win situation for everybody, but you need to have that one key politician who's bold enough to make the first move.
I have a further comment. Even the police love this because it's easier for them to do their job, which is very important, that they are a very big fan of inclusive city.
Here.
Such insightful comments. I think too, our sector has the power to set the narrative, and I don't think we always take that responsibility very seriously. The way that we as organizations talk about homelessness, the way that we talk about people experiencing homelessness can help to set that dialogue. And looping back to something Francesca said in her conversation, it's very important to be incorporating people with the lived experience of homelessness into the dialogue, because that begins to break down stigma even further. And people in our communities learn people experiencing homelessness are just people. And to break down that stigma and those kinds of narratives as well. And then always looking to the data. You know, there's, again, I think these myths around how property values will be driven down if you have affordable housing built in your neighborhood. And you know, there's all these concerns that just don't bear out in reality and in the data. And so doing our work to kind of educate our neighbors and our communities on how and why it's a win-win-win for everyone when homelessness is ended is something that we as a sector absolutely need to do a better job of. Okay, we have just 5 minutes left. I've saved the easiest question of all for last, which is really around ethics and data collection. So Tom, several folks were struck by these GPS trackers,
Oh
and
yeah,
it's not
I
specific to GPS either. Like I remember being in a conversation many years ago, and at the time, the commissioner for homelessness in Chicago was saying, look, for people of privilege, we're talking about protecting our data. We're talking about keeping our data private. And so why is it that when we're working in homelessness, we're talking about collecting and sharing more and more data? And so I think this is a very huge question, but I'm going to send it to you first, Tom. Where do we draw the line? How do we think about ethics and data collection?
I can say when we made this data collection, I made a TEDx talk about it, and that meant suddenly there was a lot of persons in the whole world who was having some kind of thoughts about it. There was even a very big article in Germany in the German newspaper or magazine called Stern about it. It was very interesting because it also showed the difference in this. In Denmark, we had this kind of attitude. Hey, this could be good because then we could learn something more, and for sure we won't misuse this data because it's for this reason, and we have a lot of legislation that tells how we should treat it. So we were very sure about that. But when I read the news, these articles in Germany, it started up with a background about Second World War, and then the things in East Germany about how they felt that they have been overlooked all the time, and they had a long discussion going on internal in this article at the comments, but it ended up with somebody say, hey, why can't we just think this is not going to be misused, and if it gives some sense to do it, maybe we could learn something. I think that's a button comment about it, because we didn't misuse it and we learned a lot, and it was voluntary that people attended into it. We even had a thought to do it again, but it was very expensive and we didn't have the money to do it again. I think it's something we could learn more of doing again. We had different kind of investments going on afterwards on behalf of the knowledge we got in this. So they also use it in kindergarten to describe their roads from forwards and back from the kindergarten. It's a lot of possibilities in this if you use it right, and of course it's a scaring. It gets misused.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think we talk a lot about, you know, the voluntary options, the client consent, helping clients really understand how that data will be used, putting in safeguards to make sure that that data doesn't get misused. These are very complex things that have to be thought about. And I'm sure folks are going to be looking up that TEDx talk you did, Tom, on that. So many other incredible questions in the chat. One around how racism plays and continues to play an issue in homelessness. We definitely see this globally. We also see differences in how this conversation is carried out. So in some countries, they don't use the term racism like we do in the United States. They would use the term social exclusion. And I know that in some countries, they don't collect disaggregated data on race and ethnicity. This happens a lot actually in European countries because of the sort of heritage of World War II. And so, you know, the question I think is coming from someone in the United States. And so we have to understand that our language and the way that we talk and think about how racism has an impact on homelessness, the language gets really, really nuanced globally. But at the end of the day, there's no question that whatever your country or community's marginalized or oppressed population is, they will be overrepresented in who becomes homeless and who experiences housing and insecurity. Other panelists want to jump in on that one. We are exactly at time, so we'll just take another minute of conversation. Yeah, Francesca.
Maybe just to build up on what you said, indeed disaggregated data, but also data about experiences of people and discriminatory experiences they have faced or face when trying to access services like housing, healthcare, etc. And qualitative data on top of quantitative data on one hand is on the data side, and then really challenging, ensuring that we are also challenging some of the narratives and that we address the issues around social exclusion as part of the responses we give in a systemic way. So.
And I know that this is a huge issue that's faced by our colleagues in South Africa as well, and the heritage of apartheid there. And so this, this is absolutely a theme globally. Okay, we are a little bit over time. I'm sorry that we didn't have the chance to get to all the questions. I'm really struck by just the thoughtfulness and insightfulness of the questions coming in. We are thrilled you were able to join us today, all of you, on World Homelessness Day, to recognize that this is a global issue with a lot of nuance, but there are promising practices, there are evidence-based practices that we can all do a better job of including and incorporating into our efforts to end homelessness. I also saw requests for more, webinars and things like that, into which I would say the working group is a group of volunteers. And we are always looking for more folks to join us so that we can continue to be kind of putting together conversations just like this from a global perspective. And so please, check out the website that was included in the chat earlier. You can email WGEH wgehomelessness@gmail.com. My colleague Tiffany has put expression of interest form in the chat if you're interested in joining the working group. And some of our panelists and attendees are sharing their emails in the chat, so feel free to grab those out as well. I know World Homelessness Day is an active conversation on different social media platforms, so during the day and even into tomorrow, wherever you are in the world and what day, part of the day you are in right now, please be following along and sharing content that you find meaningful, because this is truly a global movement. We are all in this together. And I want to say a huge thanks to our amazing panelists today. A huge thanks to the working group committee that planned and pulled together this event. And we are just really grateful for all the time and attention and wisdom today. So thank you, everyone. And we'll send through kind of a recap and the link to the webinar recording. And Tom and Juha, do you mind if we share your presentations with the attendees? Okay, looks like we'll be able to share those as well. And again, also thank you to Carlos, our interpreter, who was furiously working behind the scenes to make sure that this got translated into Spanish for our Spanish-speaking colleagues as well. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you all very soon, I'm sure. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.